As journalists, I don't know if you find this, it's very difficult to get detailed policy,
concrete policy choices
that you can report on. And it is very personal. It's like, what's the scandal that this politician has done? In the UK, we have some of the most scandalous politicians, but people are kind of more focused on the manifesto of what policy is happening.
We are going to see the death of the rice growing industry in Taiwan because water resources is scarce, is limited, and it has to be given to the industries. The rice farmers, when I interviewed them, they were told to stop farming for that year because there wasn't enough water for the chip makers. Yeah, it continued for 2-3 years, and I think it's going to continue into the future.
Hi there, I'm Dr. Aziz Mulla. You're listening to the Ripple Effect podcast, where we discuss some of the most current issues in and around Taiwan and why they should matter to you. After all, whatever we choose to do or not do can create ripples that have major consequences. This series is brought to you by TaiwanPlus, in association with our original docu-series, Our Ocean. Now, let's not waste any more time and dive right in. Hi and welcome to another episode of The Ripple Effect brought to you by TaiwanPlus. My name's Dr. Aziz Mulla. I'm a postdoc at National Taiwan University. Today, we have two fantastic guests with us, and we're going to speak about one of the most important industries in Taiwan, and that is the role of the media in communicating effectively. Maybe you could introduce yourself for us.
Okay, so thank you, Aziz, for inviting me to the program. My name is Kwanying Liu. I work as a journalist at Commonwealth magazine, 天下杂志. So for those of you who don't know about the magazine, we have been 43 years and going strong, I hope. And so our founder is a veteran journalist who used to work for the New York Times and UPI. And she founded a magazine 43 years ago when the U.S. broke ties with Taiwan, and she felt that Taiwan really needed a magazine that has our own voice, and we have to continue to put Taiwan on the spotlight to make sure that Taiwan matters to the world. So I've been covering energy and climate for the magazine for the past 10 years. So that's a really long time. And on the sidelines, I also host a podcast. It's called Taiwanology. It's our very first English podcast.
I would recommend everyone to go listen to it.
Thank you. Please subscribe 5 stars.
Honestly, it's such an honor to be sitting next to such an inspirational journalist for me. Especially, I do climate and ecology for TaiwanPlus News. So we're mostly television-based news. And so I focus on all topics from energy, pollution, biodiversity, protests, human rights, all the issues that touch on this very broad topic. And so it's daily news beat coverage, both within Taiwan and internationally. And our audience is mostly, in the US, actually, even though we do have a channel here in Taiwan. Many people watch us on social media. So recent, summits and meetings between leaders, and also, of course, focusing on Taiwan's elections. Mm-hmm. And all of the issues related to what Taiwanese people care about, and, trying to connect that with audiences abroad and what they care about too.
Perfect. And your name is?
I'm Sally Jensen. I'm from the UK. I'm British Peruvian, and I've been at TaiwanPlus now for just over a year.
Fantastic. Well done. Okay. I think out of all the podcasts, this is probably the one I'm most nervous about as well, because I think it's you guys usually in this seat. And not the opposite way around.
That's true. I feel very at ease now because usually I'm the one who's supposed to be asking all the questions. But
when I spoke to a couple of people this week about having you guys on the show, and I want to read you some quotes they said about you.
Oh, no.
I'll tell you which one is about who. First one, she's lit. And that means excellent. I had to Google it. She's excellent, exciting, won loads of prize in journalism. Another quote, one of the best young upcoming journalists in Taiwan. So that kind of got me a bit more nervous about speaking to you guys, but nonetheless. First question to you guys. I want to know what it's like being a journalist in such a chaotic world.
Oh my God! Yeah,
you have more experience.
I'm older, so no. It's a struggle each day, I would say. As a journalist at a business magazine, so covering energy and climate, it's an uphill battle because the challenges are so huge, and it looks like we're losing the battle because you see the temperatures rising, you see the ocean, and we're just talking about the coral reefs that are dying. And I was very depressed to know that all the coral gardening might not pay off in the end. That's really the biggest shocker for today. So every day, if you look around, there's nothing but bad news. It looks like when it comes to environment, and our Earth is sort of dying. So coming from the background of business journalism, and especially at Commonwealth Magazine, we're always taught to highlight the positive side.
Yeah.
Even when you feel hopeless. It's like 40 years ago when Taiwan felt abandoned, everybody was losing hope, and some people were fleeing the country, seeking refuge. Some people stayed and decided that we have to make something.
And look at us now.
Yeah. So we have to fight on. So from my perspective, covering the environment, so I always try to find the intersection of environment and business. So even though that we may talk about greenwashing subjects, but I have to say that not all businesses are engaged or primarily engaged in greenwashing. Some companies are still trying their best to find solutions. A recent example, I'm doing a lot of research on the Taiwan cement company. So I think it's a pretty unique company. It was one of the first, it was the very first Taiwanese company to be listed on the stock market. It has number 1 in the stock market. It was a cement company to begin with. It is Taiwan's largest cement company, but they have been so aggressively transforming into a green energy and circular economy company. And I'm working on a profile on them. So in a few years, I think they will get over half of their revenues coming from businesses that are not cement related, or at least not traditional cement. So I think it's stories like this that really reminded us there are still things that we can do, and there's still some people in businesses that are trying to do our best in changing the situation, however difficult the challenge is.
So there are kind of like there's optimism in it as well, like, because I mean, even in academia, we see this as well, a lot of bad stuff happening, but there are potential. That's kind of what I would stick to, potential resilience, recovery of these things. We can actually change course. Would you agree, Sally?
Well, I kind of try to balance this line, because a lot of people say, oh, this is doomerism when you're covering the same issues
Doom
that
and
we
gloom,
are.
yeah.
Doom and gloom, there is solutions journalism as well. I tend to focus on the doom and gloom, and I have been asked, as I'm sure you have as well, how do you get through each day without falling apart? And honestly, it's about, I don't know, just making jokes and laughing at work, and just, it sounds really just like you're depersonalizing it, but otherwise it would just get way too much.
The thing is as well, no matter how bad it gets, like, you still have a job to do, and that is to inform.
Exactly.
And that is to get that and communicate this to the public.
And like Kwanying says, it's like if trying to affect change in a way, obviously, we're impartial journalists, we report what's happening. But at the same time, I find it quite frustrating that this is often not a priority for many people, for many audiences. Yeah. But I care so much about this country that we're in, and I love it so much here, that I feel that this, as long as it's a priority for me, that's what I'm just going to carry on doing. And that's what drives me every single day. Fantastic. And the injustice and that whole side, it's not something that is separate from humans. It's, this is why I often wonder about this word environment, because It's not something that's just out there,
We're
ethereal.
in it. Yeah.
You know, we are part of it. That's why climate and ecology for me is the right term.
Fantastic. Yeah, I hear the passion in your voice for sure. So if you liked our content from today, please like and subscribe on YouTube, but also on TaiwanPlus website, and we'll post all of our links to social media below. Make sure you like this video and subscribe. Okay, so being a journalist, very difficult. You guys are, I would describe, a pillar of our democracy. It's kind of up to you guys to inform, to communicate. We're leading up to the election in Taiwan. What do you think are the big issues people are speaking about or should be speaking about in Taiwan?
You're Taiwanese.
Right. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently, and well, you know, I think the election, it happens all the time, every 4 years, every 2 years. But something I find really worrying is that people tend to just focus on China. I mean, of course, China is a big problem, but I feel like a lot of the oxygen was being sucked away, and people are not really talking about how to address the issue of the environment, of energy, and also even on inflation or stagnant wages or property prices. So these are the questions that are really deciding how people are going to live in the future. And also these are the, you know, big life decisions. And I just feel like more people need to, you know, beside voting, maybe also try to engage in discussions, serious discussions about the future and also how you want your society to be. A recent experience that was really eye-opening to me was it was organized by the French representative office in Taiwan. They put together a trial for the future generations, and I was invited to be the president of that trial. It was actually a mock trial. That was really interesting. They invited 3 expert witnesses, and there's 1 prosecutor and 1 attorney. We're trying to determine the question whether drawing inspiration from indigenous wisdom is enough to save our planet. That's a provocative question, but then so we were able to through previous interviews, we were able to write a script, and it was more like a staged performance. But there were like 400 participants in Taiwan, and each of them were so engaged, and they were thinking about the question, they were listening to the testimonies, and in the end they voted. I feel like this is a good way to start serious discussions, because when you put yourself in the place of deciding the future for the future generations, it's more serious than choosing a leader. And actually
once every 4 years.
Once every 4 years, and they don't even really care about you. They just care about staying in power.
I think that's why the idea of community is so important. Like even your local community, your city community, your region community, it's so important to feel you're part of something, because like you said about the environment, we're part of it. You are going to reap the consequences of destroying it. So this idea of voting for someone every 4 years, but always being engaged, is very difficult, because it's only these times of year of the 4 years where we feel so engaged with these issues, and we leave it to the politicians, when actually we should be the ones contributing to that.
I mean, from an outsider's perspective, I feel that Taiwan's election is very personality driven.
Yes.
You know, the way that politics works here is kind of the antithesis of community, really. I was in the coalition discussion for they wanted to form an opposition coalition.
Yeah, that really happened.
And, you know, as journalists, I don't know if you find this, it's very difficult to get detailed policy,
concrete policy choices
that you can report on, and often I have my colleagues asking me, what's so-and-so's policy on this? Yeah. And I have no idea, because no one said anything.
They don't even know themselves, I think.
Right.
Which is really scary.
Yeah.
Which is really scary.
And it is very personal. It's like, what's the scandal that this politician has done? And, in the UK, we have some of the most scandalous politicians, but people are kind of more focused on the manifesto of what policy is happening. So
definitely.
Yeah.
I think there was a fantastic article in the Commonwealth on that about substance of policy and how it's lacking. And it seems as though people in Taiwan have got used to that, and that's okay. Whereas, in fact, if actually speaking to a lot of younger generations, it's not okay. And they are the issues that they really care about, they want to hear about. They want to hear the changes. So hopefully, I mean, policy after election is a dangerous kind of route to go down. We don't know about that in the UK because we don't elect anymore. But but yeah. So communication, extremely important. And Taiwanology, fantastic podcast to listen to. And I see Sally's face all the time, all over Twitter, all over media. And you guys are fantastic at interviewing and asking the right questions. But what do you find difficult in communicating ideas? What do you find difficult in communicating specific topics?
Mm-hmm. Well, so I'll speak from as a business journalist. So our readers are primarily business owners or people who are have leading positions in the business, and usually 99% of the time they care about the bottom line. They care about returns, revenue, investment. How do we make more money? How do we help our shareholders make more money? So that's usually the one thing they care about. So I would say 10 years ago, when I started reporting on climate change related issues, the clicks were really bad. Nobody really wanted to read those stories because they felt so distant to us and making money, what it had to do with us companies. But I really felt that things have changed since the Paris Climate Agreement. COP21, it was in 2015. That was really the watershed moment when more people in the business community that really connected with their fate to climate change. Yeah. And they're sort of forced to because their customers and their partners, they're all saying that if you don't care about this, we will not do business with you. We cannot, by law. And so since I would say 5 or 6 years ago, the difficulty was not people don't care about it, is that we started seeing like an explosion of environment-related, ESG-related coverage. So there's so much coverage out there. And you might even say it's greenwashing. So it never rains but pours. Mm-hmm. It's like people have been sleeping, and all of a sudden they started to wake up, and everybody was panicking. Like, how do we do something about the environment?
Yeah.
So I think the difficulty really changes over time, and right now it's for us to try to find the angle that really matters for the business and the people. So what can we find the really worthy stories to tell?
Yes.
So that people are not inundated with greenwashing or just fake stories. So I think that's my challenge now.
I think one of the issues is that we don't realize that we're kind of playing catch up. All the data shows us, especially in terms of coral reefs, that we are way behind where we should have been. And now feeling the effects, we're only taking action because they are happening in front of our eyes. And it's funny you mentioned that about kind of market-driven changes, because the episode on fisheries said exactly the same. In terms of Taiwan's fishing industry has changed a lot over the last 30 years, and it's been driven by the markets of in Europe, in America, that they are more aware of where these fish are coming from and how they're being caught. And I think that's a great thing, that people still have a big impact on these companies. And obviously for a lot of us, we're like, it's not enough, but it's something. And and if you've seen that change, at least that is
I feel for me it's just generally not just any companies, but fossil fuel companies are so entrenched in society.
COP28.
And I mean, not just there, but in the media as well. I read a study recently that natural natural gas. So gas companies have pumped so many millions of dollars into this idea that natural gas, as we call it,
is clean, is good.
And so often, you get this pushback from other journalists saying, oh, well, we have to use the term natural gas because that's what people know it
I think
as.
it's also because clean coal didn't work out very well.
Yeah. And so it's
yeah.
pushing back against this. And also, I guess apathy in a way, a lot of people will feel like, well, what can I do against a big fossil fuel company? And so it's telling the stories that really, and making those links. Like, I know people care a lot about cross-strait issues, but there are a lot of links between all of this.
Definitely.
It's all fueled by the way that money flows around the world. And, wars happen because of this. And
100%.
It's absolutely interlinked, and I think that's trying to connect the dots in a way that's understandable to viewers in 2 or 3 minutes in my case,
And that must be so difficult.
but telling those human stories, seeing the brave people who are working on a small scale in their community, or taking to the streets and really trying to speak up for the rights of millions of people whose lives they are feeling the impacts, but maybe they don't have the voice to do so.
So keeping with climate change, communicating about climate change, I know, Sally, you do it quite often on the news because the coverage from TaiwanPlus is pretty extensive. For Taiwan in particular, what is the outset? What are we doing in terms of climate change? How is it affecting us? What have you seen around Taiwan?
Well, I would say, Taiwan is equal parts responsible for and vulnerable to the effects of climate change. I feel, there have been studies to show that it's more impacted. I think almost double the temperature rise is felt in Taiwan than the global average. And at the same time, it's one of the highest emitters per capita in Asia. It really is a kind of microcosm of what is happening elsewhere, but almost turbocharged in a sense.
It's a fantastic case study.
It is. And I feel there are so many issues here, like the drought that was going on for the past, several years. Is something that connects Taiwan to the rest of the world, because we see these problems, maybe the other countries don't have the same semiconductor industry that consumes a lot of water, but these kinds of conflicts between industry and agriculture.
Prioritization of, usually it's
Yeah.
not people. Usually it's things,
profits,
it's
right?
profits and it's products.
It is. And I think people around the world in different countries connect to that. And then you mentioned the indigenous groups as well. I know that they're very aware of indigenous issues around the world. So they're quite tapped into all of that.
Yeah. So the drought problem really is a good example of how you could really see the disasters are not spread evenly.
Yeah.
Because we were looking at the sectors in Taiwan that's suffering the most from the droughts are actually the rice farmers in the south, and also in the north, not just in the south. The rice farmers, when I interviewed them, they were told to stop farming for that year because there wasn't enough water for the chip makers. Yeah, and it's going to become the norm. Yeah, it continued for 2-3 years, and I think it's going to continue into the future. So we are going to see the decline or maybe the death of the rice growing industry in Taiwan, because water resources is scarce, is limited, and it has to be given to the industries.
And I feel really grateful that you have also been to cover that, because this is another issue with news, is when it's like a fast-paced daily thing, it's difficult to cover something that's so long-term.
Yeah.
And, fortunately, I was able also to go and speak to some rice farmers in the south. But again, it's something that, when it's not happening immediately, when it's not, this sensation of, wow, this is new, it's really difficult to cover these long-term issues.
I found that when I think we first spoke about the coral bleaching in 2020. And it was a real kind of obvious impact of climate change, but also the lack of typhoons that was happening in Taiwan. And it was very hyped up It was very hyped up for all the right reasons, for sure. But, you know, after a month or so, it just disappeared. How do you kind of keep that momentum going in the media? Because like you said, it's very fast paced. Things are changing and happening all the time. How do you keep people interested?
Well, just quickly on the typhoons, because I covered the last 3, and even just slipping into the report was you're in the typhoon, you know, there hasn't been a typhoon for the past 4 years, and it's hoped that it's going to refill the reservoirs because there have been droughts.
Do we really want to live like that? Like we're hoping for a typhoon to secure our, you know, our water and food security? I don't think that's how we should live.
Yeah.
Like, because we know there'll be some years where we don't have typhoons.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, historically, Taiwan does rely on typhoons for
historically,
all of this. So this is, you know, very important to agriculture, and just kind of showing how even like using the kind of chaos and drama of the typhoon and being like, by the way, we need this because blah, 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 and climate change and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
So sometimes you take those boring issues and try and put them into something that's visually arresting or whatever is happening.
Yeah. More recently, just a couple of days ago, an oil spill on the east coast of Taiwan, and TaiwanPlus did a really good job in communicating this. For things that happen very fast and things that do need and deserve the coverage, especially in an election period, how best can we communicate this to the general public? And should this be an issue to the general public? You know, why should individuals care about it? People are here to, you know, make their own lives, their own livings. They have a lot of other issues that they need to focus on. Why should individuals care?
I think human health is a major topic, and a lot of politicians around the world are bringing this idea of health, and pollution kills millions of people.
I know,
and like that's one thing, you know, you think that actually props to my colleague Laurel Stewart who covered that oil spill.
Yeah.
And as she went down there, she said, you know, you see people, they're surfing, they're swimming in the sea, and they don't know that oil is there, and that impact on
and that's
somebody's
where
health.
Awareness comes in, and it's already too late.
It's so linked, and the health benefits of proper urban planning, and not even just physical health benefits, but also mental health benefits. You know, there's so much to it that is a solution, and you know, I think that's what can really make people care a bit more.
Definitely, if you kind of bring the solutions to people. I do actually feel like vast majority of people in Taiwan do want these changes, but actually enacting them and enforcing them is difficult. I get that, but that's kind of where, you know, the government can play a big role. And I think in terms of the media, that's where we should be able to communicate the benefits of them. And usually with urban design, it's always going to be beneficial. Yeah. And we see it around the world, pedestrianisation of places. I think this is kind of a weird angle, but Taiwan didn't benefit so much from other countries during COVID, especially in the UK. I can speak, a lot of places, a lot of roads were just shut down and pedestrianised because they realised we don't need these roads anymore, and Taiwan kind of missed out on that because we were so well protected.
Business as usual.
Yeah. I mean, another issue was that, you know, people were working from home, which also massively has an impact on, you know.
Yeah.
And whereas here things carried on generally as usual, but of course, you know, the amount of tourism around the world suddenly plummeted, which is absolutely great for emissions because not everybody is flying around.
When do you think there should be any kind of policy when people come to Taiwan? How can we kind of give back to the environment in any way? We were speaking the other day about sustainable tourism. What role does that have to kind of play in this?
I'm very drawn to the idea of sustainable tourism. It might sound paradoxical because the idea of going somewhere where for tourism purposes, it's already something of an excess. We were Sally and I were just in a degrowth workshop, and that's something that we talked about as well. But I do know that there are a few startups in Taiwan that are promoting and actively redesigning ways for tourism. For example, there's one group, I think it's called Park Bus. They try to bring people in the national parks, and they have really low impact ways of travel. They also try to promote vegetarian diet during their trips. And I also know of the communities who are trying to design their own tourist packages that involve maybe the indigenous leaders telling the tourists what kind of culture they had and how do they hunt, how do they coexist with the surroundings, the nature, and how people are encouraged to just consume enough, not overconsume, not to hoard. So I think these ideas, they are becoming more attractive to people. I know of a few friends who are parents of young children. They are younger parents. They are well educated, and they would actively seek out the kind of experiences that highlight sustainability rather than just
let's
taking
go on
pictures.
holiday to Thailand.
So
One of the issues with that, though, is the cost. I went to Shaliocho a couple of weeks ago, and the entire cost of two people getting their hotel is the same as going to Thailand, is the same as going to Vietnam, and sometimes it's cheaper to do that. And that's where I found like COVID was a kind of real help for Taiwan as well, because people rediscovered what they have here. They have the beaches, they have the rainforest, they have an amazing environment. But we all knew after COVID it was just going to go back to normal. And despite the flight prices and things like that, it has kind of got back to normal.
I think for me, this idea of sustainable tourism. What does sustainable mean? Like, honestly, when it's, and it breaks my heart because I love my friends back home, but sometimes, they're jetting off on a weekend away to the other. And it's like, that's where the problem is. And this is a justice thing, again, because it's very few handful of people in the world who can afford to fly, who do create these
who have that excess,
and
that excess.
It's really frustrating because I, as a former backpacker, I backpack around, but I would as much as possible stay for as long as possible at months on end in each place, and I'm not going home for Christmas. I try to avoid. I'm very happy being in Taiwan because there's so much to explore here. It's an incredible place, and I feel like in my whole life I would never be able to see everything that I want to see in Taiwan. So I think it's just that kind of...
Definitely. I think like the word excess really screams out to me there. I mean, even this summer we had a conference, APCRS in Singapore. During COVID, we had Corey conferences online, and it worked perfectly. It was no problem. But now we just go back, so we're all gathering in Singapore from around the world, going, well, climate change is really bad. I'm like, well, how did you get here?
COP28.
And it's the same with COP. Let's go on to COP28 actually. So Taiwan does have a delegation there. You just mentioned, but obviously not fully represented there, which. Personally, I wouldn't say is a bad thing at all. I think in terms of climate change goals and sustainability, Taiwan usually follows the UN anyway. But COP28 happening in Dubai, where can Taiwan have a voice in that? Where can Taiwan lead, do you think? Are there any good examples of Taiwan leading in terms of climate change, sustainability, that maybe COP28 is missing out on?
Right. I wouldn't consider COPs to be the best occasion for Taiwan to do anything. It's usually, if anything makes the headline, it's how badly Taiwan is doing on those global rankings of climate performances. But again, coming from a business perspective, we are noticing that some companies are really trying to work in a way that's going to maybe try to lessen the harms of how their business practices are doing to the environment. For example, there's one guy that I interviewed before who was coming from actually a chemical industry, but he just recently retired and he is going to use his knowledge in chemicals in starting a company that's making concrete that absorbs carbon.
Okay.
And if that works, that sounds like a good idea
Yeah.
for the environment and also, I guess, a good business idea. So I really believe that in Taiwan, there are a lot of bright minds who are in all kinds of industries. And if they put their efforts or time, resources into it, they could come up with good ideas that are outside of the box and maybe bring some new solutions, and that's better for the environment.
Kind of touched upon that in the docuseries, like going around Taiwan, really seeing people who put their time, their money, their effort into things without any backing and making a real difference, even if it's like in Keelung Harbour. Like there's a lady who created a machine to collect the trash and she just did it off her own back. And so people are there willing to, with solutions already. And I mentioned to you before about my friend who works at the bank, the greenwashing kind of stuff. And I asked her, I said, what's the biggest things in the way of Taiwan progressing in terms of climate change? You want to guess what she said?
No.
The government.
Oh.
The government. She said these are the biggest kind of hurdles to get over, mainly through bureaucracy, but also through just, we don't want to go down that avenue, unfortunately. So I feel this huge disconnect between the population, what people's views are, and what the government are actually kind of heading down towards or want to head down towards, unfortunately.
I've spoken to people who are at COP and who are, trying to push for Taiwan to have more participation in the international summits and meetings. And, the thing that's touted about Taiwan is always business and technology.
Yeah.
And they're actually relying on certain technologies that don't actually exist yet. So there's this idea of innovation, but, with the time that we don't really have, it does kind of beg the question of how much should we be relying on future generations or
Yes.
young people to be fixing the problems, and with things that maybe they have impact on perhaps a local level, but when there's such a major obstacle, which is just powerful, wealthy people, is just, maybe it's a systemic issue,
Yes.
a structural issue that really needs to be overhauled completely, not reformed, but absolutely just upturned on its head. And I really think that's kind of thinking outside the box, really.
I agree, though. I think it's not necessarily you can't have this business. It's that it just needs to change and everything with it needs to change. You can still have it. You can still prosper, for sure. But we have to do it in a way that benefits at least us all a little bit. And I feel we can even bring that down to like a local level of like road safety in Taiwan. It will benefit us all in the end if we do follow it. Just the other day, I think maybe you covered it, the taxi drivers protest.
Oh, yeah.
Protesting against road safety. I understand concerns, but do we not want to live in a healthy, safer city? Is that not what we all want? And if we do, how do we best get there? And that's something which I know in academia we struggle with because we shy away from it a lot. We are kind of there to offer solutions, but not there to implement them. We can just kind of offer, and that's not really how it should be. We should kind of have that bridge, that connection.
Well, I think that's often a talking point in degrowth as well, is this idea where, money is so entrenched in our societies. And, when that's the way that you make a living, that's the way how you have a life, and there's all kinds of wealth aspiration. People would like a private jet and a mansion with a pool and all these fancy things, but it's like you said before, it's about sufficiency rather than luxury, and this is perhaps one of the most damaging parts of the current system, is that that's what everyone just needs money in order to survive.
Yes.
And then how do we keep growing on this planet making sure that everybody has the same amount, you know, and keeping equality, but without completely trashing it.
Yes.
It's
extremely. I think the money side of it is really highlighted. Like if you look at the article in the Commonwealth on housing, I did not know the average cost of a house was 50 million in Taipei. 50 million. And
it's probably higher now.
I was just amazed and just said, if you look at that as a young person, and you think of the word opportunity, you have no opportunity to ever afford it. And I mean, by the time you've paid it off, you'll want to sell it anyway. So that side of things is really, sounds very pessimistic, but I think the kind of, if we highlight and recognize the systemic issue, that's at least a way forward to try and solve it.
Right. And I do think people, I agree with Sally that money, capitalism, it's so entrenched in our society. But I also feel like there is kind of backlash growing. It's still a very small group of people who are unhappy about the system and they want to break away from it. I think we have seen that in a lot of other places too. So France, for example, or Germany also, I know that there are a few communities of people, they just decided to live in the country and try to live a very simple and self-sustained life. They grow their own food, their vegetables, and they build their own houses. They're kind of withdrawn. I make it sound bad, but it's not. It's a kind of experiment of people who are trying to live really in a low impact way. And I know of efforts in Taiwan. There are also people who are trying to live in communities like that. They are small. They are maybe not many people have noticed them, but they do exist. Yeah. And I do believe this is growing, albeit slowly.
It happened in COVID in the UK because a long time we used to have a lot of allotments. So allotments kind of like a patch of land that you have and you grow your own food and you share that food between. And they just boomed during COVID because people were so focused on their community and not focused on going to Ibiza instead. And it helped a lot. But how we kind of maintain that is difficult, and how we spread that across. And I think is something which I personally feel a little bit is missing in Taipei, especially like communities. We have these distinct areas, these districts, but there's I don't belong to it. Like I'm part of it, but I don't really feel I belong to it, unfortunately. So that's definitely something. I don't think it sounds depressing. I think it sounds good. I think it sounds.
And also locally grown fruits, vegetables, so good here in Taiwan. That's why I'm here. I'm just like, delicious.
I was saying that at lunch. Yeah. I was like, I'm going to miss the vegetables.
It's so good.
I hate to end it because we could probably go on for a long time, but a final question to you is concerning the education system in Taiwan. Taiwan actually produces some of the most intelligent people on the planet in terms of grades, for sure. And the young people who I interact with at Taida, they're most definitely ahead of the time. But what role does the media, what role do journalists have to play in that, in influencing, improving education systems in Taiwan and around the world?
Well, I wouldn't imagine that a role of educator, because education is such a daunting task, and it takes hundreds of years. So we have a saying in Chinese, 十年树木，百年树人. Well, if you want to grow a tree, it takes 10 years, but to grow a person, it takes 100 years. And sometimes I get pessimistic when people ask me about the education system in Taiwan, because with all the talk of education reform, my friends who are teachers, they are still surrounded by parents who only want their kids to perform well at tests.
Yes.
And going to prestigious school as if that's the ultimate solution to a happy life.
Or to get a good job.
And to get a good job, to get a good paying job, and that's it. You have a happy life, and never have to think about what you really want in life. So when you ask the question to them, they don't even know why that's important.
Yeah.
So that's depressing. But we could see that there's some educators who are thinking differently. I know of a group of parents they have decided to adopt the model of the Jane Goodall School, the root and shoot system. So they have implemented in one of the public schools in Taipei their education system. So they really prioritize coexisting with nature, and they have innovative ways. They don't have just indoor classes. They have classes outside in the nature. And I also know of Lift, the school that's started by a group of French parents. They also have a new education system. And I do believe that some parents and some teachers, but mostly it's the parents, I think, who are demanding a new way for education. I believe that this group is small, but they are definitely growing.
Yes. We actually covered some of that in the docuseries in the south of Taiwan, in Chaliocho, where students obviously are way more in touch with nature because it's surrounded by them. Where to graduate, they have to kayak around the island. And, little small acts like that just remind you that I've been given this. Like, this is something which I also have to take care of. And I come from a big city, Manchester in the UK, and we forget that too. We're not connected at all. I think Taipei sometimes can be the same. So that is definitely a route to get nature and the things that actually matter back in.
Yeah,
education.
and as journalists, I think reporting on these issues as well.
Yeah,
I mean,
highlighting them.
Yeah,
this is happening. Yeah.
I think education systems around the world are really not equipping young people for the present and the future that we're facing. And, basic things like permaculture, also how to deal with a flood, how to help people in the event of disaster, how to
deal
understand
with the aftermath of disaster as well.
Yeah, there's going to be climate refugees, how a society is going to change. So this is like completely not in most education systems, but it's definitely something that needs to be there. And I know that, there are people working on this, and this is something that, I also hope to devote more time to being able to report on in Taiwan.
And you'll find I find most of the time these issues that you guys report on are the most interesting because they're real. They're real issues. When someone talks to me about, I don't know, a petty crime kind of happening, I can't really relate to it. But when someone talks about how my life has been affected by the semiconductor industry or by the chip war or by another country next to me, at first you feel it's nothing to do with you, but that's the power of the media to get that through to people that this is part of your life.
Right.
Sure.
And I want to emphasize that we are journalists, so we are natural communicators, but I want to say that everyone can be a communicator. Because if you pay attention to what's happening around you, if you see someone who is doing something beneficial for the community, for the environment, like a guy sitting on the street selling the fruit or vegetables coming from his farm, you can maybe support him. Yes. You could tell people to buy from him. So, you support the local businesses and you tell people about it. Everyone can. They have a smartphone. They have IG. They have all kinds of ways to reach out and tell their stories. So I really think everyone can be a communicator in telling compelling, powerful stories.
I 100% agree. Mm-hmm. I think that's the best place to stop. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Ripple Effect. If you like this video, please share your thoughts and opinions down below. We'll also put all our social medias in the box below. Make sure you subscribe and like this video. Thank you.